The house was too clean. That was the first thing Lydia noticed when she came home from the hospital at 7 in the morning, still wearing the paper bracelet they'd clipped to her wrist 2 days before. The floors didn't have the usual scatter of Owen's shoes by the door. The kitchen counter was wiped down. No coffee mug left sitting in the wrong place. No jacket thrown over the back of the chair, the way her husband always did when he came home after midnight and thought she was sleeping. She wasn't sleeping. She hadn't been sleeping in months. Lydia Marsh set her purse down on the entry table and stood very still in the silence of her own house. 41 years old, a senior accountant at a commercial real estate firm, 2 degrees on the wall of her home office, and she was standing in her own living room, trying to figure out why everything felt wrong when everything looked fine. She walked to the bedroom. The bed was made. Owen never made the bed. 6 months earlier, if someone had told Lydia that her marriage was ending, she would have said they were wrong. Not because the marriage was good. She knew, somewhere in the quiet part of herself she rarely visited, that it hadn't been good in a long time, but because she was not a woman who let things end. She fixed things. She reorganized them. She made them work. That was how she had always operated. In college, when her roommate dropped out and left her with the full rent, Lydia picked up a second job and didn't miss a class. When her mother got sick, Lydia drove 3 hours every weekend for 2 years and never once asked anyone to notice. When her firm nearly lost its largest client 4 years ago, she worked through Christmas, rebuilt the entire account reconciliation system from scratch, and sent her boss a summary on New Year's Day. Owen Marsh had once called that quality in her the thing he loved most. He stopped saying that sometime around their 5th anniversary, they'd been married 8 years when Lydia started noticing the small things. The way he tilted his phone face down whenever she walked into the room. The way he answered calls in the garage. The way he stopped asking about her day, not with any resentment or argument, but with a kind of smooth, practiced absence, as if she had already become part of the furniture. Present, unremarkable, unexamined. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself he was stressed about work. She told herself a lot of things in those months, in the way that women who are good at solving problems will sometimes turn that same energy toward explaining away the problem entirely. But Lydia was an accountant. She knew what numbers looked like when they didn't add up. The hotel charge in March. She'd caught it by accident, reconciling their joint account the way she did every month. 12 nights at a hotel 40 minutes from their house. Owen had told her he was in Chicago for a regional conference. She'd even texted him from a restaurant with her coworker, "How's the conference?" And he'd written back, "Long day. Miss you." She had smiled at her phone like an idiot. She didn't confront him then. She wasn't ready. She needed more than one number. So she watched. She kept watching, the way she did with accounts that didn't close right, patient, methodical, waiting for the pattern to become undeniable. By April, it was undeniable. Her name was Farah. Lydia found that out through a credit card receipt she wasn't supposed to see, left in the pocket of a jacket. Owen dropped off for dry cleaning. Farah done. She had a LinkedIn profile. 34 years old. Business development consultant. Bright smile in her profile photo. The kind of woman who used words like synergy without irony and had 300 connections in the first industry she'd ever worked in. Lydia sat with that name for a week. And then, quietly, she made an appointment with a lawyer. She didn't tell anyone. Not her sister in Portland. Not her closest friend at work. Not her mother, who was sharp enough to notice something was wrong when Lydia called every Sunday, but careful enough not to ask directly. Lydia kept everything exactly the same on the surface. She made dinner. She asked Owen about his day. She laughed at his jokes. She went to sleep on her side of the bed and stared at the ceiling in the dark and built, brick by invisible brick, the architecture of her exit. The lawyer's name was Constance Aldridge. She was 50-something, unhurried, and had a small bronze sculpture of a woman, standing alone on her desk, that Lydia stared at the entire first meeting. Constance explained what Lydia already suspected, that in their state, marital assets would be divided, that the longer she waited, the more exposure she had if Owen moved money. That documentation was everything. So Lydia documented. She made copies of everything that mattered. Bank statements, investment accounts, the deed to the house, the retirement funds she had contributed to for 11 years before she ever met Owen, and the ones they'd built together after. She kept a log, dates, times, the hotel charges, the restaurant bills, the credit card purchases in the name of Farah Dunn that ran through their shared expenses like a thread she wasn't supposed to pull. She opened a personal account at a bank across town where she had no prior relationship. She began transferring small amounts, never enough to trigger a flag, always enough to accumulate, into that account over 14 weeks. She did all of this the way she did everything, carefully, quietly, without announcing herself. Owen, for his part, noticed nothing. That was the thing about men like Owen Marsh. Not cruel men, exactly, not just men who, over the years, completely stopped registering their wives as people who might be paying attention. He came home late and slept soundly. He made plans on weekends without asking her. He spoke about their future, the lake house they'd been talking about, the trip to Portugal she'd suggested 2 years ago, as if everything was exactly as it had always been. Lydia found this, in a strange way, clarifying. There was no version of this marriage she wanted to save. In June, she found the document. She wasn't looking for it. She was in his home office, looking for a phone charger. Hers had stopped working, and she needed to make a call. And the folder was on his desk, not hidden, just sitting there the way people leave things when they've become careless, because they've never had reason to be careful. It had a law firm's logo on the cover page. She opened it without thinking. It was a financial separation proposal, drafted by an attorney. Owen's signature was on the bottom of the last page, dated 3 weeks prior. Lydia stood in her husband's office and read every word. He had been planning to offer her a settlement, a number that was less than a third of what she was actually entitled to. The proposal had language in it, careful, lawyerly language, that characterized her income contributions as supplementary and his as primary, which was factually wrong. She had out-earned him for 6 of their 8 years. The retirement fund alone, the one primarily funded by her premarital contributions, had been listed as a joint asset with equal split, which was also wrong. He had a lawyer, he had a plan, he had a number he'd decided she was worth without ever once asking her what she thought. She took photos of every page with her phone. Then she put the folder back exactly where she'd found it, walked out of the office, and called Constance from the driveway. "He's already retained someone," she said. "Then we move faster," Constance said. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of Lydia's life. She got up every morning and made coffee and put on her work clothes and drove to the office and did her job. She came home and made dinner and asked about Owen's day. On Saturday, she went to a yoga class, and on Sunday she called her mother, and on Monday she had lunch with a coworker and laughed at a story about a difficult client. On the inside, she was dismantling her life with the focused efficiency of someone who has already grieved what they're about to lose. She worked with Constance to build a counter-documentation package. Everything Owen's lawyer had gotten wrong, corrected, cited, and sourced. She had Constance's office send a formal notice of retained legal counsel directly to Owen's attorney, which meant Owen would know she knew, but by the time he knew, she would already be 3 steps ahead. She booked a short-term rental under her maiden name, Lydia Farrow, 2 towns over. Nothing dramatic. A furnished apartment on the 4th floor with a parking garage and a door that locked from the inside. She arranged for her important mail to be forwarded to Constance's office. She told her firm's HR department she would be taking 2 weeks of leave, beginning on a Friday in late June. She scheduled movers for the Thursday before that Friday. The movers took only what was hers, her clothes, her home office equipment, the furniture from the guest room that had belonged to her grandmother, the art she'd bought before the marriage, the kitchen stand mixer she'd gotten herself for her 36th birthday. She didn't take anything they'd bought together. She didn't want it. She left a note on the kitchen counter, brief and precise. "Owen, my attorney will be in touch. The paperwork has already been filed. Do not contact me directly. L." She walked out of the house at 2:15 in the afternoon with her car packed and the door locked behind her. She did not look back at the house. She had already decided she wouldn't. Owen called 40 minutes later. She let it go to voicemail. He called 4 more times before 7 o'clock that evening. Then he texted. Then he called again. She read the texts from her apartment sitting on her grandmother's old armchair with a cup of tea she'd made on the apartment's small stove, and she felt, this surprised her, almost nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, not the anger she'd been quietly carrying for months. Just a kind of clean, level stillness. The voicemails escalated in a predictable arc. The first was confused. The second was apologetic. The third accused her of being irrational. The fourth, this was the one that told her everything she'd needed to know about the man she'd married, was quiet and cold, and he said, in a voice she recognized as the one he used when he was very certain of himself, that she was making a mistake she couldn't undo. She forwarded all of them to Constance. Through the early weeks of the separation, Farah Dunn's name came up twice. Once in Owen's emails, which Lydia no longer had access to, but which Constance's process surfaced through discovery, and once when Farah herself called Lydia's personal cell number. Lydia had no idea how she'd gotten it. She let that one go to voicemail too. The message was strange. Farah's voice was higher than Lydia expected, and there was an edge to it that sounded almost, not guilty exactly, nervous. She said she thought Lydia should know that she and Owen were serious, that she wasn't going away, that Lydia should make this easier for everyone by cooperating. Lydia played the voicemail twice, sent it to Constance, and blocked the number. There was nothing in the world that Farah Dunn had to say to her. That was one of the things Lydia had gotten clear on in those long ceiling-staring nights in her old life. Farah was not her problem. Farah was a symptom. The disease was Owen's. His willingness to take what wasn't his, to be careless with someone else's life, because he had simply never considered that she might be paying attention. The court proceedings took longer than she wanted and less time than she feared. Owen's attorney was thorough, but had built their case on faulty assumptions. Specifically, the assumption that Lydia didn't have full documentation of her premarital financial contributions, and the assumption that she would be emotional and therefore less credible. Both assumptions turned out to be incorrect. Constance was precise, unhurried, and quietly devastating. She had a way of presenting a document to the court that made the other side's version of the same document look like a rough draft. When Owen's attorney argued that her income contributions were supplementary, Constance set 11 years of tax returns on the table and let the judge look at the numbers. The judge, a woman in her late 50s named the Honorable Vivian Tran, had a way of looking at the courtroom that suggested she had seen a great many people underestimate a great many things, and that she had never found it interesting. Owen sat across the aisle from Lydia at the hearings and looked, for the first time in their marriage, uncertain. She noticed that he had gotten a haircut. She noticed that he was wearing the tie she'd given him for their 4th anniversary, which was either a coincidence or a choice she didn't want to think about. She noticed that he looked at her several times, and she looked back steadily, without heat or tears, just even and clear, and he was always the first to look away. Farah did not attend any of the hearings. Owen's attorney pushed for an equal split of all retirement accounts. Constance pushed back with source documentation, rolled it out methodically, and the judge sided with her documentation 3 times in 4 rulings. The home equity was divided, but the formula Constance had argued, weighted by documented contribution, resulted in a figure significantly larger than what Owen had proposed in that folder Lydia had found on his desk. He also owed her attorney's fees. His lawyer had made a procedural misstep in early discovery that Constance did not let pass. On the last day, walking out of the courthouse into a gray Tuesday afternoon, Lydia stood at the top of the courthouse steps for a moment and breathed the outside air. The city went on around her. Traffic, voices, a bus pulling away from a stop down the block. Normal, indifferent, ongoing. Her phone rang. It was her sister, calling from Portland. "How did it go?" her sister asked. "Fine," Lydia said. "It went fine." She walked down the steps and got into her car and drove to the furnished apartment that was becoming, slowly, something closer to home. People asked her later. Her sister, her mother, eventually a few friends she let back in. Whether she was angry, whether she hated him, whether she wished she'd done it sooner. She thought about those questions honestly, the way she thought about things that mattered. The anger had been there. She wouldn't pretend otherwise. There were nights in that apartment, the early ones, when the room still felt unfamiliar, and the street noise was different from what she was used to, when she lay awake and felt something close to rage. Not at Farah, who was almost beside the point. At Owen, yes, but more precisely at herself. At all the months she had spent explaining things away, smoothing things over, choosing not to see what was already there to be seen. But she wasn't built to stay in anger. She had used what the anger gave her. Clarity, momentum, the focused certainty of someone who has finally stopped negotiating with a problem and started solving it, and then she had set it down. By late summer, the apartment had a small herb garden in the kitchen window. She'd bought a decent coffee maker. She was back at work, and there was a proposal on the table that would give her a more senior role, and she was considering it seriously for the first time instead of deferring the way she used to when the timing wasn't right for Owen's schedule or Owen's plans. The timing was hers now. She thought about what Constance had said on the day the settlement was finalized. They were standing in the parking lot of the courthouse, Constance pulling on her coat, and she'd said, not unkindly, but in the plain-spoken way she had of saying things, "You did the hard part before you ever walked into my office. Most people don't. Most people wait until they have nothing left to work with." Lydia had thought about that for weeks afterward. She'd spent a long time in that marriage working with what she had, which was, in the end, not very much. A man who saw her as furniture. A future that had been quietly decided without her. A version of her own life she had never agreed to. What she'd done was simple, really. She'd stopped trying to fix what wasn't hers to fix. She'd paid attention. She'd worked with what she actually had instead of what she wished she had. And she'd walked out on a Thursday afternoon with her grandmother's furniture and a clean, clear path ahead of her. She didn't think of it as revenge. She thought of it as accounting. The numbers had never lied. They had been there the whole time, patient and exact, waiting for her to stop looking away and start looking at what they actually said. She had always been very good at reading numbers. It turned out she was better at it than Owen had counted on. Better than his attorney had expected. Better, maybe, than she had ever quite given herself credit for. That, at least, was something she took with her when she left. That she kept.